There's an amazing piece of this whole healthcare drama. Really, the Republican-Democratic drama, the hard right versus the rest of America drama, the racists versus the rest of us drama that's being played out beneath the radar. And I want to lay it out for you, because I think it's just a crying shame that America is not talking about this. You will recall, well, actually, let me get to that in just a second. First of all, the amping up of racist rhetoric in the United States has been steadily going ever since President Obama was nominated by the Democratic Party to be their nominee for president. All the dog whistle stuff, all the coded language, it's been flying fast and furious. Some of it has been quite explicit. James Clyburn yesterday was talking African American, the House Majority Whip, one of the most powerful and influential men in the House of Representatives, was talking about how he's receiving faxes that have things like nooses on them. You know, we had African American members of Congress on Sunday walking in to vote, being called the N-word, and one was spat upon by these so-called conservatives, these so-called Republicans. Well, maybe I shouldn't say so-called Republicans, by the Tea Partiers. Here's what Clyburn had to say.
If you look at some of the faxes that I got today, racial slurs, nooses on gallows, and I'm telling you, some very vicious language. This stuff is not all that isolated. It's pretty widespread. I hope it's not too deep.
Yeah, and here's what I want to. This is the thing. Everybody has been focusing on the word Waterloo in Senator Jim DeMint's statement. Everybody's been focusing on the Waterloo. There was a whole, entire segments yesterday in the news were devoted to the use of the word Waterloo. I was most fascinated by the use of his word breaking, his use of the word breaking in reference to President Obama. Listen to this clip. This is Senator Jim DeMint talking about how the Republican strategy was to stop President Obama's health care legislation from being successful. Here he is.
If we're able to stop Obama on this, it will be his Waterloo. It will break him, and we will show that we can, along with the American people, begin to push those freedom solutions that work in every area of our society.
It will break him. Now, what the hell does that mean? This is a congressman from South Carolina, a state where for over 200 years there was an industry known as slave breaking. From the Columbian, Missouri newspaper, September 26, 1935. It's a story about a 115-year-old cabin being restored that had been lived in by a slave family, freed slaves. And Uncle Jim, who this elderly African-American who lived in this cabin, I'm quoting from the newspaper story. He says, according to Uncle Jim, Massa Dave, M-A-R-S-E, Dave, never had his slaves whipped like some folks did, and he never sent them to the slave breaker. Now, quoting from this 1935 newspaper, the slave breaker, the boogeyman of the Negro people, has retained a vivid spot in Uncle Jim's memory. And then they quote Uncle Jim, the former slave. He was a big, brawny man, and he was mean. He had a place here in town. I guess it's about where the Chink Sales garage is now. And whenever a slave became too unruly, his master took him to the slave breaker, who didn't often fail to beat the rebellion out of him. Slave breaker had a pen with a log fence about 10 or 12 feet high. He'd put the bad N-word in there and beat him several times a day. End of quote. We have, Glenn Beck talking about Barack Obama having a deep-seated hatred of white people and the white culture, in quotes. Bill O'Reilly saying the left sees white men as a problem. So Jim DeMint, how could a senator from South Carolina refer to breaking the first African-American president of the United States and mean anything other than dog whistle language to his constituents? What alerted me to this, frankly, was an email that I got from an African-American resident. I've gotten several, actually, from people who live in South Carolina saying, how come the national media is not talking about the fact that Jim DeMint used the word breaking, or it would break him, in reference to Obama? Frederick Douglass was, when he was 16 years old, a slave. And his owner sent him to a professional slave breaker, a fellow by the name of Edward Covey. And he writes about this in his autobiography. This is from his autobiography, written in 1845. It's from a chapter called "Cowardice Departed, Bold Defiance Took Its Place." Frederick Douglass. He said, if at any one time in my life more than another, I was made to drink the bitterest dregs of slavery, that time was during the first 6 months of my stay with Mr. Edward Covey. We were worked in all weathers. It was never too hot or too cold. It could never rain, blow, hail, or snow too hard for us to work in the field. Work was scarcely more the order of the day than of the night. The longest days were too short for him, and the shortest nights too long for him. I was somewhat unmanageable when I first went there, but a few months of his discipline tamed me. Mr. Covey succeeded in breaking me. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. On one of the hottest days of the month of August 1933, Bill Smith, William Hughes, a slave named Eli, and myself, this is Frederick Douglass writing, were engaged in fanning wheat. The work was simple, requiring strength rather than intellect, yet to one entirely unused to such work as me, it came very hard. Keep in mind, he's 16 years old. About 3 o'clock of that day, I broke down. My strength failed me. I was seized with a violent aching of the head, attended with extreme dizziness. I trembled in every limb. Mr. Covey was at the house, about 100 yards from the treading yard where we were fanning the wheat. On hearing the fan stop, he left immediately and came to the spot where we were. He hastily inquired what the matter was. Bill answered that I was sick and there was no one to bring wheat to the fan. I had by this time crawled away under the side of the post and rail fence by the yard, hoping to find relief by getting out of the sun. He then asked where I was. He was told by one of the hands. He came to the spot and after looking at me for a while asked what was the matter. I told him as well as I could, for I scarcely had the strength to speak. He then gave me a savage kick in the side and told me to get up. I tried to do so but fell back in the attempt. He gave me another kick and again told me to rise. I tried again and succeeded in gaining my feet but stopped to get the tub with which I was feeding the fan. I again staggered and fell. While down in this situation, Mr. Covey took up a hickory slat with which Hughes had been striking off the half-bushel measure, and he gave me a heavy blow upon the head, making a large wound, and the blood ran freely. And with this, he told me to get up again. That's slave breaking. Senator Jim DeMint. Play that clip real quickly if you've got it, Jacob. Senator
if
Jim
we're able to stop Obama on this, it will be his Waterloo. It will break him,
Stop
and we will...
right there. It will break him. What the hell is going on in this country?